Know your place. The words sliced through the ballroom before the wine ever fell, loud enough to hush the soft Christmas music and sharp enough to make even the chandeliers feel cold. Adrian Cole stood beside the towering tree like a man who believed the season belonged to him. Tuxedo flawless, smile polished by wealth and applause. His arm was raised high, bottle tilted above his assistant's dark hair, waiting for the room to lean in. And on her face, caught in that frozen second, a quiet shock bloomed into something harder to name. The mansion glittered with gold light and winter luxury, the kind that makes people forget they're human and start acting like crowns don't leave dents. Candle flames trembled along a long banquet table, and behind her, guests in diamonds and tailored suits watched with eager curiosity. Phones were already lifting, not to protect, but to capture. In a sea of laughter and power, she looked small only because everyone expected her to be. Yet her red dress was simple, in a way that felt chosen, not accidental, like she didn't need the room's approval to exist in it. They called her the new assistant, the quiet one who never missed a detail, who anticipated needs before they were spoken aloud. She'd spent the evening moving through the gala like a gentle shadow, refilling water glasses, sorting last-minute papers, smoothing corners of the night no one else noticed. Her hands were steady, her voice soft, her posture respectful. Not once did she ask for attention. And still something about her calm presence had been irritating Adrian all night, as if her silence were a kind of refusal to worship. Adrian loved being adored. He didn't even hide it. He had built Hamilton Enterprises from a name into a monument, and every person here owed him something, a promotion, a contract, a seat at a table they never deserved on their own. The applause of rich people is a strange drug, sweet at first and then necessary, and Adrian had been drinking it for years. Tonight, standing in the center of his kingdom, he wanted a laugh that proved the world still bent toward him, and in his mind she was the easiest stage to use. "Come on," he said, voice silky with the confidence of a man who has never been told no in a room like this. "It's Christmas Eve. We deserve a little fun." A diamond-clad woman giggled into her glass, and a younger investor clapped as if cruelty were entertainment. The orchestra hesitated, the violinist's bow hovering uncertainly. The assistant opened her mouth not to argue, but perhaps to understand, and Adrian lifted 2 fingers, gentle, dismissive, silencing her the way people silence a song they never meant to hear. The wine began as a thin ribbon of red, then thickened into a stream that caught the warm light as it fell. It touched her hair, soaked instantly, and slid down her temple like a slow wound. It traced her cheek and her throat, darkening the neckline of her dress. A gasp fluttered somewhere near the back, but laughter rushed over it, louder, brighter, almost desperate. Adrian's smile widened, as if he were gifting the room a memory worth keeping. "Know your place," he repeated, softer this time, closer to her ear, where words hurt more because they sound almost intimate. The phrase was small, but it carried years of belief. The belief that some people exist to kneel so others can stand taller. Around them, the guests waited for the usual reaction, a flinch, a tear, a hurried retreat. In their minds, humiliation was a rule of the game, and assistants were pieces on the board. But the rule broke the moment she didn't move. She didn't wipe her face. She didn't step back. She didn't lower her eyes. Wine dripped from her lashes, falling in slow red drops onto the marble floor, and still her gaze stayed fixed on Adrian's. Her breathing was steady, almost measured, as if she were counting the seconds of the room's cruelty. It was a silence that didn't beg for mercy. It held the shape of something waiting to be revealed. And the longer she stood there, the less the laughter sounded like laughter at all. A shift crawled through the crowd, subtle but undeniable. A board member's wife looked down at her own hands, suddenly uncomfortable. The man recording lowered his phone without realizing it. The pianist pressed a single wrong note, and it hung in the air like a question no one wanted to answer. Adrian felt it too, the tiniest crack in the night's certainty, yet pride made him ignore the warning. He had never been thrown off balance by an assistant before. She lifted her chin just slightly, not in defiance, but in dignity, like someone rising from a prayer. When she finally spoke, her voice was gentle and clear, the way wind sounds when it slips through pine branches. "Merry Christmas, Mr. Cole." There was no anger in it, no trembling, no plea, just calm, and that calm struck the room harder than any scream could have. For a breathless moment no one laughed, no one moved, no one even seemed to know what part they were supposed to play next. Adrian's smile faltered so quickly he thought no one noticed, but she did. Her eyes held something the wine couldn't wash away, something the crowd couldn't understand yet. And as the Christmas lights blinked softly behind her, like a heartbeat refusing to stop, Adrian felt a chill he couldn't explain, because somehow the powerless girl he had tried to shame was looking at him as if she already knew exactly who would be humbled before the night was over. She stepped out of the ballroom as if crossing an invisible threshold, leaving behind the echo of forced laughter and clinking glasses that no longer held any power over her. The golden warmth of the party dissolved into the cooler hush of the hallway, where pine garlands glowed faintly under soft bulbs. Wine slid from her hair to the polished floor in quiet drops that sounded louder than the orchestra she'd abandoned. Her steps were measured, each one anchoring her breath, and inside her the heavy quiet settled, deeper than humiliation, deeper than pain. The door closed with a gentle click, a sound that felt more decisive than shouting. She placed her palm on the wall to steady her balance, not out of weakness, but from the shock of sudden solitude. The cold air brushed her skin, soothing the sting of wine drying across her cheek. She drew in a long, trembling breath that finally acknowledged what had happened. For the first time since the wine touched her hair, she let the moment arrive fully. Her reflection in the hallway mirror drew her in like a magnetic confession. The woman staring back looked wounded yet unbroken, her expression layered with dignity, disbelief, and something fiercer rising beneath the surface. Wine traced dark, uneven paths down her face, staining her dress in jagged patterns. She studied her own eyes, expecting tears and finding none. The mirror didn't just reflect her, it recognized her. Memories rushed in, not the humiliation itself, but everything that had carved the road to this night. Choices made, promises whispered, truths guarded beneath silence. She leaned closer to the mirror, searching for the version of herself she'd been just hours ago. But that version felt distant, like a name she hadn't spoken in years. A quieter, stronger self was taking shape, made sharper by hurt, steadier by purpose. Her fingers brushed her soaked hair, the strands cold against her skin, and the humiliation finally struck with its real weight. It wasn't the wine, it wasn't even Adrian. It was the way the world had watched, amused, indifferent, entertained. A shiver ran through her shoulders, the kind born from an old wound reopened. She closed her eyes for a moment, gathering herself from the inside out, and even in the tremor, her breath stayed controlled. She walked deeper down the corridor, leaving behind the muffled pulse of music and conversations echoing with arrogance. Garlands brushed against her arm as she passed, their pine scent stirring memories of childhood winters and quiet church pews. The nostalgia hit unexpectedly, tightening her throat. She swallowed hard, refusing to let the memory pull her backward. Tonight wasn't about the past, it was about what she carried into the future. Near a window, the hallway opened into a wider space, a small vantage point overlooking the snowy garden. She moved toward it instinctively, letting the cold glass press against her forehead. Outside, flakes drifted slowly, falling without urgency or witness. Their softness contrasted the violence of the ballroom. She watched them, allowing their indifference to calm her heartbeat. Snow didn't judge, didn't laugh, didn't choose sides. As she leaned closer, her silver locket slipped from beneath her dress, catching the faint light like a whisper of truth. It was small, worn, meaningful, more real than anything in the gilded ballroom she had left behind. She held it gently between her fingers, letting the familiar metal ground her. The memories inside it were heavier than humiliation. They were purpose, identity, mission. And suddenly what happened earlier felt less like defeat and more like an awakening. Soft footsteps echoed behind her, hesitant, cautious, nothing like the predatory curiosity of the guests. She didn't turn. She stayed facing the window, watching snow gather on the garden benches like untouched secrets. Her fingers curled around the locket, protecting it. She sensed the presence behind her, not as a threat, but as the beginning of something shifting. The air grew tighter, waiting. Then she whispered words meant only for the silence, her voice a fragile thread carrying the weight of timing and truth. "Not yet," she breathed, the phrase dissolving on the cold glass like a vow kept hidden. She straightened, wiping a streak of wine from her cheek with slow, deliberate grace. Her eyes hardened in clarity, not anger. And as the footsteps stopped directly behind her, the night seemed to hold its breath, because something was about to break open. Morning light used to drift through her small apartment with a gentleness the world rarely offered her. Before Hamilton Enterprises, before the mansion, before Adrian Cole's arrogance stained her dress, her days followed a rhythm soft enough to trust. She brewed tea slowly, letting the steam rise like a prayer, filling the quiet with warmth instead of fear. Her grandmother's old radio played low hymns that reminded her of simpler faith. And in those quiet mornings, her heart rested in ways it no longer could. She often visited her grandmother's nursing home on weekends, bringing flowers that looked too bright for the sterile hallways. The elderly woman would hold her hand for long minutes, tracing the lines of her palm as if reading a story she already knew. "You carry strength you don't understand yet," her grandmother would whisper. Those words lingered even now, long after the old woman's hands had grown colder. It was from her that the locket came, an heirloom born of truth. Before taking the position as Adrian's assistant, she had lived an orderly life, careful but not small. Her skills were sharp, her mind steady, her patience remarkable. People underestimated her often, mistaking quietness for submission. She didn't mind. Silence had always been her ally. Silence let her observe what others missed. But the day she received the confidential letter, everything shifted. It wasn't a job offer. It was a summons. An invitation tied to lineage, responsibility, and a truth she had been prepared to confront her entire life. She remembered sitting at her kitchen table, hands trembling slightly as she read her name, accompanied by a title the world did not associate with her. A title that explained everything, demanded everything, a title she could not ignore. She entered Hamilton Enterprises not as a desperate worker seeking opportunity, but as someone following a thread woven long before Adrian Cole had ever learned to command a room. Her presence there had purpose, carefully planned, ruthlessly quiet. Each step she took through its glass hallways echoed with the weight of what she was meant to uncover. And though she walked among them unnoticed, she was never lost. She was studying. Her kindness toward colleagues was genuine, yes, but it was also strategic. She needed them to speak freely, to reveal truths they didn't realize they carried. Adrian, however, was the hardest part of the mission. His pride made him unpredictable, his charm made him dangerous, and his insecurities made him cruel. Still, she watched him closely, not with admiration, but with a deep, discerning understanding of men who hide behind power. Her notebook filled quickly with observations, patterns, inconsistencies, pieces of a puzzle only she had been trained to see. Yet each time she watched Adrian mock someone, dismiss an idea, or weaponize his charm, she wondered if redemption was possible for a man like him. A faint hope lived inside her, one she tried to ignore. But fate doesn't choose clean lines. And sometimes redemption begins where pride breaks. Even so, she knew her time pretending to be just an assistant was reaching its limit. Something in the company's structure pulsed with secrecy, something that connected directly to her mission. She felt it every time she walked past the executive wing, every time she overheard a hushed conversation. The truth she'd come searching for was close enough to taste, and Adrian, whether knowingly or blindly, stood right in the center of it. One evening, weeks before the Christmas Eve gala, she found a sealed envelope slipped under her apartment door. No sender, no signature, just her name, handwritten. Her heart tightened as she broke the seal. Inside, there was a single line, short, urgent, unmistakably clear. A warning disguised as instruction, a call she had been expecting, but not this soon. And the message, ink still fresh, read only, "It's time." She remembered the first time she walked into Adrian Cole's office, long before humiliation, long before wine dripped down her hair like a curse. The room felt less like a workplace and more like a stage. Glass walls, polished marble, and an ego large enough to fill the empty spaces. Adrian stood at the window with his back to her, city lights painting his silhouette in cold blues. He didn't turn immediately. Men like him made others wait, as if patience revealed loyalty. She waited, but not for him. When he finally faced her, his smile was curated, precise, practiced. It was the smile of a man who believed power was a performance and he its star. "You're the new assistant," he said, not a question, but a reminder of hierarchy. She answered with a soft, "Yes, Mr. Cole," offering the humility he expected. But behind her eyes, she measured him with quiet accuracy. Adrian mistook silence for weakness. She knew silence was strategy. Their first conversation lasted only minutes, but those minutes were enough to reveal everything she needed to know. He dismissed questions with impatience, cut through explanations with arrogant certainty, and treated efficiency as a requirement, but respect as optional. His voice carried the entitlement of someone who had never been contradicted by anyone who mattered. She listened, cataloging every detail, tone, posture, blind spots. He had many. Yet beneath the layers of confidence and coldness, she sensed something else, fear. It hid in the slightest tremor of his eyebrow when deadlines approached, in the sharpness of his replies when chaos threatened the order he clung to. Men like Adrian didn't build walls. They built fortresses around wounds they refused to acknowledge. She saw it instantly, the way someone trained for this mission would. He wasn't just powerful, he was fragile in the most dangerous way. His office, though luxurious, felt strangely empty, as if designed to impress but not to live in. The shelves were lined with awards he rarely glanced at, photos framed more for image than memory. A single plant sat by the window, dying quietly from neglect. She noticed these details while he boasted about deals and successes. None of those achievements softened him. In fact, they hardened him further. Pride was the armor he never removed. During their second meeting, Adrian criticized a simple clerical mistake she hadn't even made. His tone was sharp, his words unnecessary. She apologized anyway, not because she was at fault, but because revealing her real authority would have ended the mission prematurely. In that moment she saw the pattern that defined him. He liked control more than truth, and truth, she knew, was the very thing she'd been sent to find. Still, she kept watching him with a patience he didn't deserve. She noticed how his anger rose when someone threatened his image, but his eyes softened barely when no one else was looking. She noticed how he tightened his grip on his pen when nervous, how he smirked when pretending confidence. She noticed everything. That was her purpose. Adrian had no idea that every cruel remark, every impatient sigh, every careless display of status was being recorded, not on paper, but in her mission. The deeper she stepped into his world, the clearer the imbalance became. He commanded a room with wealth, but not with wisdom. He held authority, but not respect. And every day she spent quietly beside him confirmed what she already suspected. Adrian was not the source of the danger inside Hamilton Enterprises. He was the shield hiding it. Whether knowingly or not, he stood between her and the truth she had come to uncover. One afternoon, while leaving his office, she paused just outside the door, hearing voices inside, low, tense, confidential. She recognized one of them, a board member whose reputation was wrapped in whispers. Adrian's voice was defensive, strained. The conversation was brief, but the tone was unmistakable. Secrets were being protected. And her presence in that building was no coincidence. She had been placed there for a reason she was only beginning to understand. As she stepped into the elevator that day, her fingers brushed against the locket beneath her dress. She felt its weight, its promise, its warning. When the doors closed, she exhaled slowly, letting the breath steady her thoughts. First impressions had revealed more than Adrian intended, and as the elevator descended, she realized something with chilling clarity. The real confrontation was coming sooner than she expected, and Adrian Cole had no idea who he was truly standing against. The first wound didn't come with wine or humiliation, but with a room full of executives and a single careless sentence from Adrian. It was during a morning meeting, crisp and polished, where ideas were supposed to matter. She had handed him a report, thorough, precise, essential, and he barely glanced at it before tossing it aside. "Next time, try not to waste my time," he said, loud enough for every suit at the table to hear. The sting of the words cut deeper than he realized. She stood behind him, hands clasped gently, posture unbroken. The executives exchanged brief glances, awkward, uncertain, but no one spoke. Power has a way of paralyzing conscience. She swallowed the hurt with grace, though her chest tightened around the quiet injustice. In that moment, she understood how easily cruelty passed as leadership in this company, and how necessary her presence there truly was. What struck her most wasn't the insult itself, but the disappointment she felt rising unexpectedly. Part of her had hoped Adrian might be different underneath the armor, someone salvageable, someone teachable. But his pride flared like a shield each time honesty approached him. Her disappointment surprised her, soft and unwelcome. She didn't expect to care, caring complicated missions. That evening, she lingered in the office long after others had left. The building's silence wrapped around her, interrupted only by the hum of city lights through the windows. She opened her notebook, filling a page with observations she had hesitated to write before. Patterns were forming, patterns she could no longer ignore, and Adrian was at the center of every one of them. Her pen hesitated not out of fear, but out of sadness. In the dim light of the desk lamp, she traced her finger along the edges of her locket, seeking grounding. She had accepted this role knowing sacrifice was inevitable, but she hadn't expected small, internal sacrifices to hurt more than large ones. Her purpose required distance, yet she found herself mourning the version of Adrian he refused to be, a version she glimpsed only in accidental moments of honesty he tried to hide. Late that night, she found him standing alone in his office, staring out at the city. His posture was rigid, but his eyes were darker than usual, haunted almost. For a moment the facade cracked. "People don't realize how much I carry," he murmured, unaware she had entered. She could have stepped forward, offered a word, softened him. But compassion is a dangerous thing when truth demands precision. She remained silent. The next morning he arrived tense again, mask restored. He didn't mention the moment of vulnerability she had witnessed. Instead, he offered her instructions in a clipped tone, as if needing to reassert control. She obeyed with her usual calm, though her heart tugged in conflicting directions, toward duty, toward empathy. It was a conflict she could not afford. Not yet. As the days passed, Adrian's irritation toward her grew sharper, not because she failed him, but because she didn't react the way he expected. Her silence unnerved him. Her composure contradicted his authority. Her presence made him confront parts of himself he avoided. And insecurity, when bruised, often lashes out before it learns. The first wound was small enough that the world dismissed it, but deep enough that she remembered it long after others forgot. It became a turning point in her perception of him, where hope dimmed but did not disappear. Humans rarely break in one blow. They fracture slowly, quietly, in places unseen, and she sensed Adrian's fractures as clearly as she sensed her own. That night, alone in her apartment, she opened a message that had arrived earlier, a brief line from the same unknown source. Observe, not intervene. She stared at the words for a long time, feeling both relieved and restrained. The mission required patience, and though the wound Adrian dealt her hurt deeply, she understood something vital. This was only the beginning of what she would have to endure before the truth could be revealed. The shift in Adrian was subtle at first, an extra edge in his voice, a longer pause before acknowledging her presence, a glare held a second too long. Pride, once merely annoying, began pressing down on every interaction like a silent weight. He demanded more paperwork, more tasks, more impossible deadlines, as if burying her in work could bury the discomfort she stirred inside him. What he didn't understand was that pressure didn't break her. It clarified things. She carried folders across the office floor with quiet determination, her arms aching from the load he insisted she handle alone. Executives watched her pass with uneasy glances, sensing something was wrong, but fearing Adrian too much to intervene. Every time she looked up, she caught whispers dying on lips. Yet her expression remained calm, steady, unreadable. It was the quiet rebellion he couldn't control. One afternoon, he called her into his office without looking up from his computer. "You forgot to schedule tomorrow's briefing," he said sharply. She knew she hadn't. The task had been completed hours earlier. Her fingers tightened slightly around her notepad, but she nodded and apologized anyway. This wasn't about the briefing. It was about his ego demanding tribute, and her humility challenged him more than any argument could. The office atmosphere grew heavier as December nights darkened the city skyline. Employees sensed the tension, stepping carefully, speaking softer whenever she or Adrian walked past. Even the Christmas decorations, garlands, ribbons, gold ornaments, seemed out of place amid the rising strain. She heard her name whispered behind conference room doors, always followed by pauses, heavy with curiosity, but no one dared ask the right questions. Adrian watched her from his glass-walled office, irritation flickering each time she completed a task flawlessly. Something about her steadiness unsettled him, as if she exposed a weakness he refused to name. He would give her contradictory instructions, then scold her for following one instead of the other. She accepted every unfair remark with the same grace. That grace was the mirror he couldn't bear to look into. One evening, long after most employees had left, she found herself alone in the hallway carrying a stack of heavy reports. The weight pulled at her arms, but she didn't slow down. As she passed by the window, her reflection in the glass startled her. She looked tired, bone-tired, but resolute, like someone carrying much more than documents. She paused there, letting the city lights flicker across her face. Those lights whispered the truth she already knew. This mission was changing her. Adrian left his office moments later, stopping when he saw her standing there. For a second his expression softened, almost concerned. But the softness vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by the familiar coldness he wore, like armor. "Why are you still here?" he snapped. She didn't answer. Not because she couldn't, but because the truth behind the question was bigger than either of them could handle yet. As she walked past him, he felt something unexpected twist in his chest. It wasn't anger. Not exactly. It was discomfort, the kind that comes when someone sees through you without trying. He turned away before she noticed the shift in his eyes, but she did notice. She noticed everything, and the more he tried to hide his cracks, the more clearly she sensed the truth beneath them. Her patience wasn't weakness, it was wisdom, it was strength, shaped by loss, by lineage, by promises she wasn't free to reveal. Each act of pride from Adrian fueled her resolve instead of diminishing it. She knew he wasn't broken beyond repair. But she also knew he would not heal until he confronted the consequences of the man he had chosen to be. That night, as she placed the last of the folders on her desk, she whispered to herself, not in despair, but in recognition of the storm approaching. "This isn't the worst of it," she said softly, and she was right. The weight of Adrian's pride was only the beginning of the fall that neither of them could escape. The Christmas Eve gala shimmered with golden light, laughter, and the scent of pine, but to her it felt like a stage built for collapse. She had sensed the tension rising in Adrian all week, sensed the way his pride clawed tighter every time her composure challenged him. Still, she had prepared herself for professionalism, for grace, for silence. She hadn't prepared for the moment he lifted the bottle. When the wine slid down her hair, it wasn't just an insult. It was a rupture. The crowd gasped, laughed, whispered. She heard every sound, as if underwater. Her dress absorbed the crimson stain like a wound she didn't deserve. For a moment, the mission she had guarded so carefully trembled inside her. Everything she had built, the secrecy, the strategy, the quiet months of observation, felt suddenly fragile. One public humiliation could unravel it all, and Adrian had done it without hesitation. She stepped back, her breath catching as the cold liquid traced her skin. A few guests averted their eyes, finally ashamed of their own laughter. She felt the true weight of her disguise in that instant. How easily people judged appearances, how blindly they followed those with money and confidence. Her heart tightened, not from embarrassment, but from the dangerous thought that Adrian had just jeopardized everything. Her fingers curled gently around the locket beneath her dress, grounding her as the noise of the ballroom dulled into a distant roar. She couldn't react, not the way a normal assistant would, and not the way her true identity demanded. She had to stay composed. She had to stay silent. But the silence now felt like a knife pressed between who she was supposed to be and who she really was. She moved through the crowd toward the exit, ignoring the phones raised toward her, ignoring the whispers blooming like poison behind her. Every step felt heavier, as if she carried not humiliation, but the collapsing weight of her mission. She had spent months preparing for one decisive moment, one revelation meant to expose the truth about Hamilton Enterprises. But now she wondered if she could still deliver it without appearing vengeful or compromised. At the edge of the ballroom, she paused, pressing her palm lightly against the wall to keep herself steady. Her vision blurred for a second, wine stinging her eyes, adrenaline shaking her breath. She blinked hard, reminding herself that endurance was part of the task. Still, this wound was different from all the others. This one came from the man she had hoped on some quiet level might prove better than his reputation. Her phone vibrated in her hand, startling her. She wiped her fingers on her dress before checking the screen, expecting maybe a message from a co-worker or a meaningless holiday alert. Instead, she found a single line, unsigned, urgent. Her heartbeat quickened the moment she read it. Someone was watching. Someone who knew exactly what had happened in that ballroom. Someone who knew who she really was beneath the title of assistant. She read the message again, her breath catching. "They're asking who you are." The words hit with the force of a warning shot. Her cover was slipping. Eyes that had once dismissed her were now turning curious, suspicious, hungry. And curiosity was far more dangerous than cruelty. She closed the message, hiding the tremble in her hand as another vibration shook the device. A second notification appeared, this time not a message, but a missed call. The name on the screen made her chest tighten. It was someone who should never have contacted her directly, someone from the board, someone who held the other half of the truth she carried. Her pulse thundered in her ears. The mission wasn't just at risk, it was in motion. She lifted her gaze toward the entrance of the mansion just as the doors opened. Snow gusted inward, swirling around the figure stepping across the threshold, a figure the entire company would recognize. Conversations fell silent. Heads turned. Even Adrian paused mid-laugh, and when the figure's eyes met hers, the world seemed to stop. "Where is she?" the voice demanded. "I need to see her. Now." She slipped away from the ballroom before anyone could point or question, her pulse pounding louder than the orchestra she had left behind. The winter wind swept into the corridor from the open door, chilling the wine on her skin and sending a tremor through her. She pressed a hand to her chest, trying to steady the storm building inside her. The figure at the entrance had recognized her, truly recognized her, and that changed everything. The mission was no longer quiet. It had been awakened. She found refuge in an unused guest room at the far end of the mansion, closing the door softly behind her. The silence inside felt fragile, as if even breathing too loudly might cause it to shatter. She leaned against the wall, head tilted back, eyes closed. In the darkness, she could still feel the wine sliding down her hair, the weight of every staring eye in the ballroom. And beneath it all, an ache that had nothing to do with humiliation. She had always known her identity might surface sooner than planned, but she had hoped, not expected, that Adrian would delay the inevitable. His cruelty had accelerated the unraveling in ways she hadn't prepared for. She sank onto the edge of the guest bed, gripping the sheets with cold fingers. Doubt crept in through the cracks of her composure, whispering questions she had buried long ago. Was she still capable of completing what she came here to do? The locket around her neck pulsed against her skin, a reminder of the promise she had made, a promise to protect something larger than her pride, larger even than this company. She opened it carefully, her thumb brushing the small photograph inside, one she rarely allowed herself to look at. The face staring back gave her strength, but tonight it also broke her heart. She closed the locket before the ache could grow sharper. She rose and walked to the window, watching snow gather on the garden outside. The flakes moved slowly through the night, drawn to the ground with a grace she envied. Each breath she took fogged the glass slightly, and she pressed her forehead against it, letting the cold soothe her. She didn't cry, not because she was strong, but because the mission demanded emotional silence. Still, pain pooled beneath her ribs like a tide she couldn't release. Her thoughts drifted to Adrian, not the humiliating man in the ballroom, but the fractured one she had glimpsed alone in his office weeks earlier. That moment of vulnerability had unsettled her more than any insult. It had made him real, flawed, breakable. And now she wondered whether the truth she carried would crush him or save him. She hated that she cared. Caring blurred the lines she was supposed to follow. Doubt curled around her like smoke, filling her with the fear that she might be too late, too exposed, too changed to finish her task. The board's sudden interest in her identity meant one thing: time had run out. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to find the strength she usually carried with ease. Tonight, strength felt heavier, like something she had to drag instead of embody. But even in doubt, a small ember of resolve flickered beneath the surface. She replayed moments from the past months, every choice she had made, every quiet sacrifice. None of it had been accidental, none of it had been weak. She had entered Hamilton Enterprises knowing there would be a cost, and she hadn't paid it yet. The thought steadied her more than she expected. She heard footsteps outside the room, slow and searching, her breath caught. This was no wandering guest, no curious bystander. Whoever had arrived at the mansion was looking for her with purpose. She closed her eyes, allowing fear one final heartbeat before pushing it aside. When she opened them, clarity returned, not full, but enough to stand. As the doorknob turned slightly, she stepped forward, her silhouette framed by the faint glow of snow through the window. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was soft but steady. "I'm here." The door opened, and the truth she feared and needed waited on the other side. The door didn't swing open with force. Instead, it eased inward, revealing a familiar face framed by soft worry. It wasn't a board member, nor someone dangerous. It was Michael, the young employee from administration, the one who always greeted her with shy kindness. He froze when he saw her stained dress, the wine dried against her skin like bruises made of color. His expression collapsed into heartbreak. I came to check on you," he whispered. She hadn't expected comfort tonight, not from anyone in this mansion. His presence felt like an interruption in the storm, small, human, real. He stepped inside slowly, as if approaching someone fragile, though she didn't feel fragile at all. Still, the gentleness in his eyes softened something inside her, something she didn't realize had hardened. Michael held out a towel he'd brought from the nearest washroom. "You shouldn't be alone like this," he murmured. She took the towel with trembling fingers, surprised by her own gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, barely able to form the words. He nodded and stepped closer, careful not to impose, but close enough that she could feel warmth radiating from another person for the first time all night. The kindness felt almost foreign. She pressed the towel to her face, wiping away streaks of wine that had long dried. A breath she didn't know she was holding finally escaped her. Michael looked around the room, uneasy with the quiet. "People shouldn't treat others that way, not ever," he said, voice breaking at the edges. She hadn't expected anyone here to care, not truly. But his sincerity was unmistakable, raw, unpolished, without agenda. It touched her more deeply than he could imagine. "You don't deserve this," he added softly. She didn't answer, but her silence agreed. He hesitated before sitting at the edge of the bed, leaving space between them as a sign of respect. "I've seen the way you work, the way you treat people. You're different." She felt heat rise behind her eyes, not from embarrassment, but from the weight of being seen after so many months of hiding. She clenched the towel in her hands, grounding herself. Michael's voice lowered. "Whoever you really are, I just hope you know you're not alone in this." Snow outside continued falling in slow spirals, casting pale reflections across the room. She watched it for a moment, letting its softness settle over the chaos within her. Michael followed her gaze, exhaling a long, steady breath. "It's peaceful, isn't it?" he said. She nodded. Peaceful and symbolic. Snow-covered wounds, erased footprints, promised new beginnings. The world kept moving, even when hearts splintered. She finally turned to him, her voice barely audible. This wasn't supposed to happen today. She expected him to ask what she meant, to push for answers she couldn't give. But he didn't. Instead, he simply said, "I'm sorry it did." Simple words, clean, honest, and somehow they warmed her more than explanations ever could. She felt her shoulder loosen for the first time since leaving the ballroom. Michael stood slowly, brushing invisible dust from his trousers. "I'll get you some warm tea," he said, the kind of offer that held no pity, only kindness. She blinked, caught off guard by the gesture. "Why?" she asked before she could stop herself. He paused at the door and turned, meeting her eyes with a steadiness she didn't expect. "Because everyone deserves someone who cares at least a little." When he stepped out, she exhaled deeply, the room suddenly feeling safer than before. She touched the locket at her chest, feeling its weight shift with her breath. Hope was dangerous. It clouded judgment, softened resolve, but tonight it didn't feel like a distraction. It felt like a reminder that goodness existed in places she didn't expect, a reminder that she wasn't as alone as she believed. As the door clicked shut, she closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you." Not to Michael, not to the snow, but to the fragile spark inside her that refused to die. Tonight had taken much from her, dignity, secrecy, trust, but something gentle had returned in its place, a small, defiant light, a reason to keep going, and she knew that light would matter soon. The warmth Michael left behind faded as soon as she stepped back into the hallway, replaced once again by the charged air of the mansion. The music from the ballroom had grown quieter, not because it had softened, but because the crowd was murmuring, restless, curious, unsettled. Whispers swirled like drafts of cold wind between rooms. She felt them cling to her skin as she walked. Tonight, her anonymity had cracked, and destiny was stepping through the fracture. Downstairs, the atmosphere was different now. Guests no longer laughed freely. Their smiles were brittle, their eyes scanning every corner for the next piece of gossip. The commotion caused by the arrival of a high-level figure had become the focal point of the evening. She could feel it in the way heads turned when she passed, too quickly, then away again. Fear and fascination were siblings. Both lived in these polished halls, and tonight both followed her. Her steps echoed softly on the marble stairs, each one carrying her closer to a truth she had tried to delay. The chandelier's crystal glow stretched across the foyer like a spotlight waiting for her. She tightened her fingers around the locket beneath her dress, grounding herself in its silent promise. She was no longer walking as an assistant, she was walking as herself, and that shift pulsed through her veins like electricity. At the bottom of the staircase, she could see Adrian through the blur of guests, laughing too loudly, gesturing too broadly, drowning his embarrassment in arrogance. But something about him had changed. His laughter no longer rang confidently. It cracked at the edges, brittle as thin glass. Rumor was already circling him. He felt it. Pride had no armor thick enough to stop whispers sharpened by curiosity. A cluster of board members stood near the entrance, speaking in low voices, their expressions carved with urgency. She recognized one of them, the same name that had flashed on her phone, the call she hadn't answered. Their eyes tracked her movement even before she reached them, as if some unspoken thread had pulled them toward her. The weight of their attention was not condemning, it was expectant. Heavy with what they already suspected. She stepped closer, and the chatter around them fell into a hush that spread like a ripple. The board member closest to her straightened his jacket, his face settling into a look that was both stern and respectful. "We've been looking for you," he said, not a question, not a reprimand, a statement laden with meaning. She felt the room shift, every gaze turning, every breath pausing, every heartbeat leaning forward. Adrian noticed the sudden silence and turned toward the commotion. The moment his eyes met hers, something dark flickered behind them. Fear, recognition, denial. Perhaps all three at once. His hand slowly lowered the champagne glass he held. though he tried to make the gesture appear casual, but nothing about him looked casual anymore. He saw it now. The balance of the night had tilted, and not in his favor. The board member took a small step toward her, lowering his voice as though addressing someone far above her supposed rank. "It's time we speak," he said. The words weren't harsh. They were careful, respectful, as one might speak to someone with power. Real power. Murmurs rose like wind across dry leaves, and she felt dozens of eyes trying to piece together what they were seeing. The assistant, who did not cower. The woman the board sought. The one Adrian had humiliated. Her breath steadied, her spine straightened, and she lifted her chin with a quiet grace that felt both new and ancient. For months she had walked these corridors unseen, but no longer. She nodded once, slowly, and the board members exchanged glances that confirmed what she already knew. The truth was stepping into the open, whether she was ready or not. Destiny rarely waited for permission. The board member extended his hand toward the doors of the mansion. "Come," he said. And as she moved forward, passing Adrian without a single look in his direction, the entire room held its breath. Because whatever she was about to reveal would change everything. She followed the board member through the corridor, the murmurs behind them swelling like a tide she could no longer hold back. The doors to the private lounge closed with a soft thud, sealing her away from the hungry eyes of the ballroom. The room was dim, lit only by the glow of a fireplace and the soft reflection of snow drifting outside. She stood tall despite the wine-stained dress, despite the ache beneath her ribs. Tonight, she would no longer hide behind silence. The board member, the one whose missed call had shaken her, stopped before her, his expression solemn. "We didn't expect things to escalate this way," he said quietly. His voice held no accusation, only concern. She nodded, understanding more than she let on. "I tried to stay unnoticed," she replied, her tone calm, "but Mr. Cole made that impossible." The man inhaled sharply, as if ashamed on Adrian's behalf. Another board member stepped closer, his brows furrowed in something close to regret. "We received reports tonight," he said, choosing his words carefully. "Reports that confirmed our suspicions about you." She held their gaze, unflinching. This was the moment months of preparation had led to, the moment where truth would carve its first line into the night. She placed one hand on her locket, letting it anchor her. "Then you already know who I am," she said softly. A silence fell between them, thick with unspoken tension. Finally, the older board member nodded. "Yes," he murmured. "We know you are not an assistant." His voice carried weight, respectful, reverent even. The flames from the fireplace crackled like punctuation. She felt the old life she had crafted fall away like dust from her shoulders, but something about the moment felt incomplete. She sensed caution in their words. They knew, but not everything. She stepped forward, allowing the amber glow to illuminate her face. "You know my name," she said, "but not my purpose." Her voice was steady, but edged with something deeper, authority wrapped in restraint. The two men exchanged uneasy glances, realization dawning slowly. "There have been rumors," one said. "Whispers that you were sent on behalf of someone higher, someone with ties to—" He hesitated. She finished for him. "To the founders." The truth landed between them like a quiet thunderclap. Their eyes widened, not in disbelief, but in confirmation of what they had feared and hoped. She reached into her dress and pulled out the small, folded document she had kept hidden for months. A seal stamped with a symbol only the oldest members of the company would recognize. The board members stared at it with a mixture of awe and dread. "You shouldn't reveal that yet," one whispered. She tilted her head. "You asked who I am." They exchanged another glance, the decision falling wordlessly between them. Then say it, the elder instructed. Say it yourself. She drew a slow breath, her heartbeat settling into something calmer, something resolute. She slipped the seal back into her locket, letting the weight of legacy rest against her heartbeat. I came to evaluate the company, she said quietly, from the inside, to observe, to decide who is fit to lead and who isn't. The younger board member exhaled sharply, as if the truth knocked the air from his lungs. In the glow of the firelight, his face shifted from caution to respect, deep, unguarded respect. "Does he know?" he asked. She shook her head. "Adrian Cole knows nothing," she replied, voice barely above a whisper. "Not yet." Her eyes darkened with the ache of the humiliation she still felt drying on her skin. He was never supposed to expose himself this way. Then came the voice from behind her, sharp, shaken, and too close. She froze. "Well," Adrian said from the doorway, breath unsteady, "I know now." His eyes flickered between her and the board members, confusion twisted with dawning dread. And she realized, with a jolt of cold certainty, that he had heard enough. But not nearly everything. Adrian's presence hit the room like a sudden winter gust, sharp enough to make the fire flicker. He stood in the doorway, chest rising unevenly, a storm of fear and pride battling behind his eyes. The wine in his hand trembled slightly, not enough for the crowd to notice, but enough for her to catch. His gaze bounced between the board members and her, searching desperately for an explanation that matched the world he knew. But nothing matched anymore. She turned toward him slowly, her expression calm, almost gentle, though her heart pounded with the weight of everything now exposed. Adrian swallowed hard, struggling to steady his voice. What is this?" he asked, sounding smaller than she had ever heard him. The board members didn't answer. Their silence pressed the truth further into the room. She looked at him with a quiet resolve. "A conversation you weren't meant to interrupt." His eyebrows tightened, defensive instinct flaring. "I heard enough," he said, though his voice betrayed uncertainty. You're evaluating the company? For who?" He tried to wear authority, but it slipped like water through clenched fists. She took a step toward him, not threatening but grounding. "For the same people who built Hamilton Enterprises long before you stood at the head of its table." The words settled on him with a heaviness he wasn't prepared to hold. Adrian opened his mouth to argue, but nothing came out. For the first time, he seemed aware of how hollow his pride sounded against the truth. "You lied," he said finally, his voice cracking. It wasn't accusation, it was hurt. Something inside her softened despite everything. "I didn't lie," she said quietly. "I remained silent, and you assumed everything else." His jaw clenched, wounded by the reflection she offered him. The board members stepped back, giving the two a space that wasn't just physical, it was necessary. The elder member spoke gently. "Mr. Cole, this is an internal matter, and one you should listen to before reacting." Adrian's eyes shot toward him, wide with disbelief. "You knew?" The man nodded solemnly. "We suspected, and tonight confirmed it." Adrian's breath faltered. The foundation beneath him was shifting faster than he could brace for. He tried to regain footing, straightening his posture. "If this is about the gala—" Her voice cut through the room, soft but unmovable. "This is not about the gala." She stepped closer, wine-stained dress rustling softly. Tonight only revealed what was already there. Your choices, your pride, your blindness to the people who serve beside you. Adrian flinched as if struck. He looked away, but she continued gently. "I needed to see who you were when no one was watching." The words unraveled him. His shoulders sagged, the performative confidence slipping off like an ill-fitted mask. "Is that all you see?" he asked quietly. "A cruel man." The question wasn't a challenge, it was a plea. For a moment she felt a pang of empathy, a dangerous echo of the compassion she'd tried so hard to suppress. "I see a man who forgot what it feels like to be human," she said softly, "but not one who's incapable of remembering." Adrian's throat tightened, and he looked at her as if searching for something to hold on to. "Why didn't you tell me?" he whispered. She hesitated, then answered with the truth he needed, not the one that would comfort him. "Because you weren't ready, and because the truth wasn't mine to reveal before its time." His breath hitched, wounded pride and raw vulnerability crashing into each other like waves. Silence lingered, heavy and electric. The fire crackled softly behind them, as if urging the moment forward. Adrian lifted his eyes, filled with an emotion she hadn't seen from him before. Not anger, not arrogance, but fear. Fear of himself, fear of what he had done, fear of what she knew. He took a step closer, voice barely a breath. "What happens now?" She looked at him, her expression unreadable, her eyes steady as winter. And the answer she finally gave landed between them with the weight of a turning destiny. "Now, Adrian, you face the truth." Adrian stood frozen, her words echoing in the quiet room like a verdict he had never imagined facing. The truth wasn't a blade, it was a mirror, and he finally saw the reflection he had avoided his entire life. His gaze lowered, shoulders trembling with the weight of his own actions. The arrogance he wore like armor cracked along invisible seams. For the first time that night, he didn't look like a billionaire. He looked like a man who had finally realized he was lost. She watched him carefully, not with cruelty, but with the solemnity of someone witnessing a breaking that needed to happen. She wasn't there to punish him. She was there to reveal what pride had buried. Her voice softened, though her resolve did not. "Everything you've built, everything you defend so fiercely, is at risk because you forgot the people who stand beneath your leadership." Her gaze did not waver. "Including me." Adrian's breath hitched, his face pale under the warm light of the fireplace. "I didn't know," he began, but she lifted her hand gently. "That's the problem," she said. "You didn't know. You didn't even try to. Not accusation, truth. And truth, spoken softly, struck harder than any anger could. His eyes glistened with something he fought to contain. Shame. Real, human shame. He sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. The firelight flickered over him, casting shifting shadows that made him look younger, smaller, almost fragile. "I don't even recognize myself anymore," he whispered. She stepped closer, stopping just far enough to maintain the boundary her mission required. "Then start with what you do recognize," she replied gently. "Recognize what you did, and why you did it." He lifted his head, eyes red, voice trembling. "I hurt you." She nodded once, slowly. "Yes." The simplicity of the word made his breath falter. He opened his mouth to explain, defend, soften his guilt, but she raised her hand once more. "Don't justify it," she said. "Just acknowledge it." And in that moment, something inside Adrian shattered, quietly, privately, but completely. The board members exchanged solemn looks, as if witnessing a transformation they had silently hoped for, but never expected to see. The elder member stepped forward. "Mr. Cole," he said gently, "leadership is not measured by success. It is measured by character." Adrian swallowed hard, his gaze drifting back to her, as if anchoring himself to truth for the first time in years. "Then my character is broken," he whispered, "and I don't know how to fix it." She took a slow breath, then spoke with a softness that held more strength than any reprimand. "Broken things can be repaired, but only if they're willing to stop pretending they're whole." Adrian let the words settle into him like medicine he had resisted for too long. He nodded, not in defeat, but in sincerity, in willingness. The first step toward humility is always the hardest, admitting what needs changing. Her hand moved to the locket at her chest. She opened it briefly, letting him see the seal inside. Adrian's eyes widened, not in pride or fear this time, but in understanding. Deep, unmistakable understanding. "So you really are." He couldn't finish the sentence. She closed the locket and nodded. "Yes," she said softly, "and I came to see whether this company could still be led by someone who deserved it." Adrian stood slowly, unsteady, but resolute. "I don't deserve it," he confessed. "Not the way I am." She met his gaze, her voice low but clear. "Then change." He inhaled sharply, a breath that carried both grief and hope. This was the moment, the turn, the choice, the awakening. The moment where humility overtook pride. The moment where a man began to rebuild himself, and with the weight of the entire room pressing in, Adrian spoke the words that would reshape everything that followed. "Tell me what I must do to make this right." The room held its breath as Adrian's question echoed through the quiet, each word trembling with sincerity. She studied him for a long moment, long enough to see the shift not just in his posture, but in his spirit. Gone was the man who demanded respect through arrogance. Standing before her was someone stripped bare of ego, humbled before the truth. And in that vulnerability, she finally saw the first flicker of transformation. She stepped closer, her voice soft but unwavering. "You begin by acknowledging your choices publicly," she said, "not to save your reputation, but to heal the damage you caused." Adrian nodded slowly, as if absorbing each syllable into his bones. His gaze flickered toward the door, toward the ballroom where laughter had turned uneasy. "They won't take me seriously anymore," he whispered. She offered a gentle, almost sorrowful smile. "That's precisely why they'll listen." And together they walked back toward the grand hall, the glow of the Christmas lights guiding their steps like a path toward redemption. The board members followed in silence, understanding the weight of what was about to unfold. As they approached the entrance, the noise inside wavered, expectant, uncertain. Adrian paused, breath shaking, and she placed a steadying hand over his. "Tell the truth," she murmured, "and let the rest fall where it must." But when they entered, conversations died instantly. All eyes turned toward them, toward Adrian, disheveled in spirit, and toward her, stained dress and lifted chin glowing like quiet defiance. The sight alone stole whispers from the room. Adrian stepped forward, the spotlight catching the tremor in his hands. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice breaking, "I owe you the truth." Silence deepened, thick as snow outside. He confessed not just the humiliation he inflicted, but the pride that had rotted his leadership, the blindness that had made him cruel. He spoke of mistakes, of arrogance, of an assistant he had treated as invisible. His voice faltered more than once, and every falter made the room soften. She stood behind him, a quiet pillar, allowing him the space to own his failure without shielding him from it. And when he finished, the ballroom didn't applaud. It breathed. A soft, trembling stillness settled over the guests, some lowering their gazes, others blinking back emotion they hadn't expected to feel tonight. Adrian looked down, tears gathering at the edges of his eyes, ashamed but free for the first time in years. He turned toward her, voice barely a whisper, meant only for her ears. "I'm sorry." She nodded once, gently. "I know." Forgiveness didn't erase the wound, but it allowed healing to begin. The board stepped forward next, addressing the room with solemn respect. "There is more you all deserve to know," the elder member announced. Guests exchanged bewildered glances. Adrian straightened, not with arrogance, but with readiness to accept whatever came next. She remained still, hands folded before her, prepared for the shift she had anticipated for months. Her heartbeat slowed into something steady, peaceful. The elder board member took a breath, turning toward her with a reverence that made the room lean in. "Tonight," he said, "we witnessed not only a failure, but a strength this company desperately needs." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "There are truths about our leadership structure that must be acknowledged, truths she embodies." All eyes snapped to her, curious, awed, confused. She inhaled slowly, feeling the moment crest like a wave she had been swimming toward since the day she arrived. Adrian looked at her with a mixture of fear and hope, no longer questioning her worth, only his own. The Christmas lights shimmered across her wine-stained dress as if blessing what was coming. Her fingers closed around her locket, steady, ready, certain. The board member lifted his hand toward her, voice resonating through the hall. "Effective tonight," he began, and the room leaned forward as one, breathless, waiting to hear the truth that would change everything. The board member's voice rose above the expectant hush, carrying the weight of a truth long overdue. "Effective tonight," he announced, "she will assume her rightful position within Hamilton Enterprises, one tied to the legacy of our founders and to the integrity this company must reclaim." Gasps murmured through the ballroom like a soft winter wind. She stood in quiet grace, finally stepping into the role destiny had whispered from the beginning. And no one dared look at her the way they had before. Adrian lowered his head, humbled by both the truth and the woman before him. She stepped toward him, not with triumph, but with the kind of peace only forgiveness can offer. He accepted her hand with trembling sincerity, as if afraid he no longer deserved its warmth. "Thank you," he whispered, broken yet hopeful. She nodded gently, offering not absolution, but possibility. As the night softened, the ballroom slowly rediscovered its warmth. Music returned, tentative at first, then smoother, filling the golden air with holiday calm. Guests approached her with quiet respect, some apologizing, others simply grateful for the lesson they had witnessed. She greeted each with a serene kindness that made the very room feel lighter, and behind her Adrian stood, not seeking attention, only understanding. Later, she wandered onto the balcony, overlooking the snow-lit gardens below. The cold night air touched her skin gently, washing away the last remnants of the evening's pain. Snowflakes drifted in slow spirals, softening the world into something almost sacred. She closed her eyes, letting the silence reach the deepest part of her heart. This night, once so heavy, now carried peace. The door opened softly behind her, and Adrian stepped out, his voice fragile in the quiet. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said, "but I'll spend the rest of my life trying to earn the chance to deserve it." She looked at him, truly looked, and saw not the man who hurt her, but the man trying to rise from the wreckage of his own pride. She gave him a small, tender nod, enough to guide him forward. Snow continued falling, laying a gentle blanket over the gardens, soft enough to erase harsh lines and old wounds. She felt her shoulders relax, breath deepening into something steadier. Tonight had changed her as much as it changed him. People had seen her strength, but more importantly, she had witnessed a transformation she never expected to influence. Hope stirred inside her, delicate but real. The board approached them, their faces softened by respect and quiet approval. "We will meet again in January," they told her. "There is much to rebuild." She accepted with calm certainty. Leadership was not a crown, it was a calling. And she was ready to answer it, with the humility her grandmother had once taught her to cherish. The future felt wide and steady beneath her feet. Adrian turned toward her again, voice trembling with something like reverence. "Thank you for not destroying this company," he said. She offered a gentle smile. "I didn't come to destroy anything, she replied softly. "I came to restore what was lost." His eyes glistened with gratitude and a new resolve. The kind that could turn even the most wounded heart toward goodness. As the gala came to its quiet close, she walked once more beneath the towering Christmas tree. Its lights shimmered like a constellation of small blessings, warming the room just as dawn warms the sky. She let her fingers brush an ornament, feeling the symbol of renewal in its cool surface. Tonight had begun in humiliation, but it ended in healing. She paused at the staircase, offering the room one final silent blessing. Sometimes the deepest lessons are born from wounds we never expected to survive, and sometimes the greatest change begins with a single act of grace. If this story touched your heart, leave a heart in the comments, subscribe for more emotional stories, and stay with us to watch the next inspiring tale appearing on your screen.